The ship was the size of a city. It blocked out the sun over North America like a steel cloud that never moved. People stood in the streets, on rooftops, on car hoods, all of them staring up at the same thing. Children pointed at it. Old men sat in silence. Mothers pulled their kids close without saying a word. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. They had all seen the broadcast. 12 hours ago, every television, every phone, every screen on the entire planet had gone dark for exactly 4 seconds. Then one face appeared. Not human. Long gray skull, 4 black eyes, a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed under a boot. It spoke in perfect English. "People of Earth, my name is General Xyrex, commander of the Vorrkai Empire's first assault fleet. Your planet has been selected for colonial acquisition. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. You have 60 minutes to begin full planetary surrender. Any resistance will result in the immediate destruction of your 3 largest population centers. The clock starts now." Then the screen went black again. No follow-up, no list of demands, no treaty papers, just a countdown. 60 minutes. General Xyrex leaned back in his command chair and watched the planet through the viewport of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. It was a beautiful ship, 4.2 kilometers long, armed with enough firepower to crack a small moon. Around it, 212 Vorrkai warships held position in a tight formation, the largest fleet the Empire had ever sent to a single target. Some of his advisors had said it was overkill. Xyrex had smiled at that. He believed in certainty. He had conquered 47 worlds in 200 years. Not one of them had made it past the first engagement. Most surrendered before a single shot was fired. That was the power of reputation. That was the power of the Vorrkai name. He glanced at the countdown on his screen. 54 minutes remaining. His communications officer, a young Vorrkai named Toss, turned from his station. "General, we're picking up some unusual electromagnetic activity on the surface, multiple large energy signatures in low orbit." Xyrex waved his hand. "Satellites, defense platforms. They know they can't stop us. They're just trying to look strong." Toss hesitated. "Yes, sir, but some of the signatures, they're moving." Xyrex looked at him slowly. "Moving how?" "They're moving in formation, sir." There was a pause on the bridge. Several officers turned in their chairs. Xyrex sat up straighter, his 4 black eyes narrowing. He looked at the viewport again. The planet below looked the same. Blue, quiet, small. "Show me," he said. The screen in front of him shifted to a radar display, and for just one moment, just one single heartbeat, something moved through General Xyrex that he had not felt in over a century of warfare. He didn't have a word for it in his language. In human language, the word was unease. Because on that radar, appearing slowly from behind the dark side of Earth's moon, were not satellites, they were warships. Not 10, not 20, 463 warships, moving in a formation so precise, so perfectly coordinated that for a moment Xyrex thought his instruments were malfunctioning. "What?" whispered, then caught himself. "General, those ships, they weren't there. Our full sweep 6 hours ago showed nothing behind that moon. Nothing." Xyrex said nothing. He just stared at the screen. His tactical officer pulled up everything he could find on the vessels. The data came back in pieces, and none of it made sense. The ships were human-built, absolutely human-built. The materials, the construction patterns, the energy signatures all matched human technology. But the scale was completely wrong. These weren't the small defense crafts or the low-orbit stations that his scouts had cataloged over the last 3 years of surveillance. These were full combat vessels, carriers, destroyers, at least 40 ships that registered as dreadnought class. Humans didn't have dreadnoughts. The Vorrkai intelligence files said so clearly. Humans had a small space program. They had a few orbital stations. They had some weapon satellites. Nothing more. Toss pulled up the intelligence file on screen and pointed at it. According to our records, sir, humanity has not developed FTL technology. They don't have interstellar propulsion. They are, by every measure we collected, a pre-contact civilization with no significant military space presence. Zyrex looked at the file. Then he looked at the radar. Then he looked back at the file. Then he did something his officers had never seen him do before. He stood up from his chair. Not because he was afraid, he told himself that clearly inside his own head. He stood because he needed to see the viewport with his own eyes and not through a screen. He walked slowly to the massive window at the front of the bridge and looked out. And there they were, coming around the dark edge of the Earth's moon in a long, slow, silent arc, hundreds of human warships catching the light of Earth's sun on their hulls, glinting like pieces of broken glass. They moved without rushing. They moved like something that had been waiting, something that had been patient for a long time, and now, finally, calmly, done waiting. Behind Zyrex, his bridge was completely silent. 200 years of conquest, 47 planets, not one moment like this, not one single moment when the answer on the other side of a 60-minute countdown was not surrender. His communications officer spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "General, Earth has responded to our transmission." Zyrex turned slowly. What did they say? The officer read it once to himself first, then he looked up at Zyrex with an expression that none of them had words for. They said, he paused, "You have 60 minutes." Nobody on the bridge moved, because Zyrex had given Earth 60 minutes to surrender, and Earth had just given them 60 minutes back. Zyrex turned back to the viewport. He looked at those ships. He looked at the planet. He thought about his intelligence files, his 3 years of surveillance, his 47 victories, his unbeaten empire, his certainty. He thought about the one alien species, the Drenhai, who contacted him privately before this mission and said 6 words he had dismissed completely. "Do not go to that planet." He laughed. He asked why. The Drenhai elder looked at him with something in his eyes that Zyrex now recognizes because he was feeling it himself, standing at this viewport, watching those ships come around the moon in perfect silence. The elder had said only one more thing, because they have already died before, and they came back angry. Zyrex cut the transmission and never thought about it again. He was thinking about it now. He straightened his uniform. He turned to his fleet commander. His voice came out steady because he was a general, and generals do not show what they feel. "Battle formation," he said. "All ships, full weapons ready." His fleet commander nodded. "And the 60 minutes, sir?" Zyrex looked at the viewport one last time. "We're done waiting," he quietly said. The Eternal Dominion powered its weapons, and the biggest mistake in the history of the Vorrkai Empire, the mistake that would be written about for 1,000 years across every civilization in the known galaxy, officially began.
The first shot came from the Vorrkai side. That detail mattered. It would matter later in hearings, in history books, in quiet conversations between alien diplomats who tried to understand how everything went so wrong so fast. It was the Vorrkai who fired first. General Zyrex gave the order, and his fleet opened up with everything: Plasma cannons, torpedo spreads, long-range disruptors, a wall of light and fire moving toward the human formation at full speed. The human ships did not scatter. They didn't break formation. They didn't accelerate away. They held their positions with a stillness that made Tas grip the edge of his console and whisper something under his breath that no one heard. Then, at the exact last second before impact, they moved. Not away, through. The human formation split down the middle like a river parting around a rock, the two halves rolling outward in opposite directions with a precision that absorbed the entire first Vorrkai volley through empty space. The plasma fire and torpedoes passed through the gap and disappeared into the dark. Not a single human ship was hit. Zyrex leaned forward. "How?" "They anticipated the spread pattern, sir," his tactical officer said, and his voice had a strange quality to it, the quality of someone reporting something they don't fully believe yet. "They calculated the exact dispersion of our opening volley and moved to the two outside edges of the pattern, every ship simultaneously." "That's not possible without—" Zyrex stopped himself. Without what? Without knowing his attack pattern in advance? Without having studied his fleet's tactics in detail? Without having done exactly what he had done to 47 other civilizations, watching, learning, building a picture of the enemy before the first shot was ever fired? The thought arrived cold and complete in his mind. They've been watching us, too. While the Vorrkai had spent 3 years watching Earth, Earth had apparently spent much longer watching the Vorrkai. Every battle record, every conquered planet, every tactical report that had ever leaked through galactic communication channels, humans had collected all of it, analyzed it, built models from it. They had not spent 11 years hiding 400 warships behind the moon out of fear. They had spent 11 years preparing for exactly this moment. The human ships reformed on the other side of the missed volley and held again, waiting. A second transmission came through, not to Zyrex's command channel, but broadcast openly across every frequency his entire fleet could receive, so that every single Vorrkai soldier on every single ship could hear it. A woman's voice, calm, almost bored-sounding. "This is Admiral Lena Chen, United Earth Defense Force. You fired first. That's on record. We're going to give you one opportunity to power down your weapons and hold position. One opportunity. This offer expires in 30 seconds. Zyrex grabbed his own broadcast control. "You are speaking to General Zyrex of the Vorrkai 1st Assault Fleet. You have no authority to issue conditions to—" 20 seconds, Admiral Chen said. "To the Empire's military forces, stand down your vessels immediately or—" 10 seconds. "I will personally oversee the destruction of your entire—" "Time's up," she said simply. And then the human ships fired. The difference was immediate and physical. Zyrex felt it through the floor of his bridge before the screens even updated. The Eternal Dominion shuddered, not from a glancing hit, from a direct, concentrated strike on its forward shield array by what the systems identified as 7 separate human ships firing in perfect unison at one single point. 7 ships, one target, same millisecond. Shields held, but dropped to 61% in a single hit. "Return fire, all batteries," Zyrex shouted. His fleet responded immediately, pouring everything they had toward the attacking human formation, and this time some of it connected. 3 human ships took heavy damage in the first exchange. One of them went dark completely, systems offline, tumbling slowly away from the formation. Zyrex watched it. He waited for the others to pull back, to reassess, to do what every other species had done when they took casualties in the opening exchange, hesitate. The human ships did not hesitate. The damaged vessels, the ones still partially functioning from the damaged trio, actually accelerated, pushing forward toward the Vorrkai line at full speed, firing everything they had left as they came. One of them rammed directly into the side of a Vorrkai destroyer. The explosion took both ships. Tas turned from his station, his face unreadable. "Sir, Our behavioral models for human military response suggest that after taking 3 ship casualties in the opening engagement, there is a 94% probability of defensive withdrawal and communication attempt. Zyrex stared at the expanding cloud where 2 ships used to be. "Update your models," he said quietly, because something was becoming clear to him, something that no intelligence file, no surveillance report, no 3 years of watching a civilization argue over politics and pollute their own oceans had prepared him for. Humans did not fight like anything else in the galaxy. Every other species fought to survive. When the math turned against them, they stopped fighting. It was logical, it was rational, it was what intelligent life did. Humans fought like the math didn't apply to them. They fought like losing was just another stage of the battle and not the end of it. And somewhere in the back of Zyrex's ancient military mind, buried under 2 centuries of easy victories and unquestioned dominance, a small, cold voice said something that he would spend the rest of this battle trying to ignore. "You are not winning this."
3 hours into the battle, Zyrax's fleet had lost 19 ships. He had never lost 19 ships in an entire war. He had lost 19 ships in 3 hours against a civilization that, according to every piece of intelligence he owned, should not have been able to scratch his paint. He stood at the tactical display and looked at the numbers with the expression of a man who has opened a door expecting a small room and found an ocean on the other side. His forces still had the advantage on paper. He had more ships, more firepower, better shields. The Eternal Dominion alone carried enough weaponry to end this battle if he could just get it into the right position. But every time he moved his flagship toward the human center line, something happened. Human ships appeared from unexpected angles. His escort formation got pulled in 2 directions at once. The Eternal Dominion ended up isolated briefly, never long enough to be fatal, but long enough to be uncomfortable. It kept happening, over and over, like the humans were deliberately keeping his most powerful ship away from the main engagement. Because they were. He didn't fully understand that yet, but his tactical officer, a veteran named Korath who had served in 9 campaigns, had gone very quiet in the last 40 minutes. He was running numbers on a side screen, checking them, running them again. "Korath," Zyrax said, "talk to me." Korath turned slowly. "Sir, I've been mapping the human movement patterns for the last hour, and I need to show you something." He put his analysis on the main screen. The human fleet's movements, which had appeared in the heat of battle to be aggressive and reactive, were actually something else entirely. When mapped out over time with every ship's position plotted, a shape emerged. Slow, patient, invisible unless you were looking at the whole picture from outside. The human fleet was forming a circle. Not quickly, not obviously, but ship by ship, engagement by engagement, they were extending their formation outward on both flanks while keeping Zyrax's attention fixed on the center. They were doing it slowly enough that no single moment felt alarming, but the cumulative result, tracked across 3 hours of battle, was unmistakable. The Vorrkai fleet was being surrounded. "How long?" Zyrax asked. "At their current rate," Korath said, "full encirclement in approximately 40 minutes. Then we break through the flank, right side, concentrate 3 destroyer groups and punch through before—" "Sir," Korath's voice stopped him. "Look at the right flank specifically." Zyrax looked. The right flank appeared to be the weakest part of the human formation. Fewer ships, wider gaps. It was practically inviting an attack. "It's a gap," Zyrax said, already knowing before the words fully left his mouth. "It's bait, sir," Korath said quietly. "If we push 3 destroyer groups through that opening, they'll be inside the forming circle before the encirclement completes, and then the gap closes behind them." Zyrax looked at the screen for a long time. Everything he was seeing had a name. He knew the name. He had used this exact strategy himself, on smaller scales, against less organized enemies. Draw the enemy's attention to the center, create a false weak point on one flank, encourage them to commit forces to the bait, close the trap. He had taught this, he had written about this in the Vorrkai Military Academy's tactical manual. He was watching it being used against him with a precision and patience that suggested whoever was commanding that human fleet had read that manual or something very much like it and spent considerable time improving on it. "Who is she?" he asked suddenly, "this Admiral Chen. Find me everything." Toss worked fast. The results came back thin. Human records weren't easy to pull, but the basics were there. Lena Chen, 63 years old by human counting, former Deep Space Exploration Commander, one of the founding architects of the United Earth Defense Force, listed in human records as the primary author of something called the Unified Fleet Doctrine, a tactical framework developed 11 years ago. 11 years ago, right when those ships started being built behind the moon. Zyrax looked at the encirclement map. He looked at the bait on the right flank. He looked at the slow, patient, invisible trap being drawn around his fleet by a 63-year-old human woman who had spent 11 years getting ready for this specific day. He thought about his intelligence files again. 3 years of surveillance. Humans arguing, humans struggling, humans looking small and broken and easy. He had watched them through a viewport and seen weakness. What he had not seen, what none of his scouts had been smart enough to recognize, was that every single thing they were watching was just the surface. Underneath it, quiet and invisible and completely ignored, something else had been building the whole time. Something that had no intention of losing. "New orders," Zyrax said, and his voice came out harder than he felt. "Pull the left flank inward. Do not engage the right side gap under any circumstances. Reform the fleet into a defensive diamond formation and—" Admiral Chen's voice came through the open channel again. Calm, patient, like she had all the time in the universe. "General Zyrax," she said, "I know what order you just gave your fleet. Diamond formation, left flank compression. I want you to know we planned for that too." The bridge went completely silent. "See you in 40 minutes, she said, and the human ships began to close.
38 minutes later, the circle was complete. Zyrax's entire fleet, 212 warships, the pride of the Vorrkai Empire, the most decorated assault force in 200 years of conquest, was surrounded. Not overwhelmed, not destroyed, just surrounded, contained, like something in a jar. He had tried the diamond formation. Chen had dissolved it by targeting the connective points between the 4 corner ships with concentrated fire, not enough to destroy them, just enough to force them out of position. Every counter move he made, she had a response ready. Not improvised responses, prepared responses, like she was playing a game where she already knew every move on the board, because she did. Zyrax stood at his viewport and looked at the human ships holding position all around his fleet. They weren't attacking aggressively anymore. They were holding the circle and waiting, patient, quiet, like they were in no rush at all. He finally asked the question he had been avoiding for the last 2 hours. What do we actually know about human history, military history specifically? Koroff pulled up the files. They were thin. The Vorrkai Intelligence Service had focused almost entirely on current capabilities and almost nothing on historical context. But what was there painted a picture that none of them had thought to look at before today. Humans had been fighting wars for approximately 10,000 years. 10,000 years of continuous, unbroken, often brutal conflict against each other, on land, in the ocean, in the air, and eventually in space.
While other civilizations the Vorrkai had conquered had experienced a few hundred years of organized warfare at most, humans had spent 10 millennia developing, refining, breaking, rebuilding, and perfecting the art of killing each other. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy, every counter-strategy and counter-counter-strategy, all of it developed not in theory, but in actual wars with actual casualties, over and over and over again for 10,000 years. And then they stopped fighting each other. Not because they became peaceful, not because they evolved beyond conflict. They stopped fighting each other because, and Korath read this part slowly, making sure he understood it, because 11 years ago, when Vorrkai scout ships first appeared at the edge of the solar system and humans detected them, every nation on Earth made a collective decision: save it for the real enemy. 11 years. They had held themselves together for 11 years, built those ships in secret, developed the unified doctrine, trained together, and never, not once, let anything leak that would tell the Vorrkai what was actually coming. They had presented exactly what they wanted to present, a fractured, struggling, pre-contact civilization that was too busy with its own problems to be a serious threat. It was the longest, most elaborate, most perfectly executed deception in the history of any war the Vorrkai had ever studied. "They baited us," Zyrex said quietly, not as an accusation, just as a fact, stated plainly. "Yes, sir," Korath said. "They baited us into attacking. They wanted us to fire first. They wanted the record to show that. And then they wanted us inside this engagement before we understood what it actually was." "Why?" Korath was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said carefully, "they wanted to end this, not just push us away, not a draw, not a ceasefire. They wanted to end it completely, to send a message to every other civilization watching this engagement, that Earth is not a target, that it never should have been a target, and to make that message absolutely undeniable." He looked at the surrounding human fleet on the screen. They needed to win, completely, publicly, in a way that could not be argued with or downplayed. Zyrex looked at the circle of human ships. He thought about the Drenghai Elder's warning. He thought about the 60-minute response. He thought about Admiral Hale, the human officer who had rammed her damaged ship into his destroyer rather than retreat. He thought about Admiral Chen's voice on the open channel, calm and slightly bored, telling him she knew what order he had just given. He had come here expecting prey. He was beginning to understand, with a cold and complete clarity, that he had never in his long military career faced a predator before. Not a real one. Not until today. His communication officer turned from his station. "Sir, Admiral Chen is requesting a direct channel." Zyrex straightened. He smoothed his uniform. He made his face do what it had always done. Calm, hard, commanding. He nodded. Chen's face appeared on screen. She looked exactly like her file photo. Older, tired in the way that people who carry heavy things for a long time get tired. But her eyes were clear and sharp and completely certain. "General," she said. "Admiral," he replied. "You're surrounded. Your forward shields are at 30% on most vessels. You've lost 27 ships. I have enough firepower in this formation to end this engagement in approximately 8 minutes. She paused. "I don't want to do that." Zyrex said nothing. "I want you to understand something before we continue," Chen said. "This was never about defeating you. This was about making sure this never happens again. Not to us, not to any other planet in range of your empire. I need you to go home carrying a story, not just a defeat, but a complete and total understanding of what happened here and why." "And if I refuse?" Zyrex asked. Chen looked at him steadily. "Then we finish it," she said simply, and someone else carries the story.
Zyrex did not answer immediately. He unmuted his channel, then muted it again. He walked to the viewport. He looked at the human ships. He thought about 47 conquered worlds and 200 years of certainty, and the intelligence file that had called humans a pre-contact civilization with no significant military presence. He thought about what it would mean to go back. Not just the defeat itself. He could almost process the defeat. Wars were won and lost. Even the greatest empires absorbed losses. But this was something else. This wasn't a loss in the conventional sense. This was a dismantling, a systematic, patient, perfectly executed dismantling of everything he thought he knew about this planet, about this species, about his own empire's place in the order of things. The Vorrkai had built their entire identity on being unstoppable. That identity had just been taken apart in less than 4 hours by a 63-year-old human woman and 463 ships that weren't supposed to exist. He turned back to the screen. Chen was still there, waiting with that same calm expression. "You said you want me to carry a story," Zyrex said. "What story?" "The true one," Chen said, "that you came here expecting nothing, that you found something you weren't prepared for, that you made a decision based on incomplete information and it cost you dearly, and that Earth, given the chance to finish this completely, chose not to." Zyrex studied her face. "Why does that last part matter to you?" Chen was quiet for just a moment. "Because we're not you," she said. "We didn't surround you because we want an empire. We surrounded you because we needed you to know that you cannot win this. There's a difference." She leaned forward slightly. "The Vorrkai Empire has 47 subject planets. Those people are alive. If we had wanted to build a reputation on destruction, we could have started differently. We're giving you a choice because we believe in choices, even for people who didn't give us one." Behind Zyrex, his bridge was completely silent. Every officer, every technician, every Vorrkai soldier within earshot had stopped working and was just listening. He could feel it without looking, the weight of every person on this ship holding their breath. He thought about the transmission they had sent 12 hours ago. No negotiation, no treaty, just a countdown. 60 minutes to surrender or burn. They had not given Earth a choice. Earth was giving them one anyway. He thought about the young human soldier who would later bring him food and water. That hadn't happened yet. He didn't know that was coming. But he had been watching humans for 3 years, and something about Chen's face, the exhausted, certain, completely sincere expression of someone who had spent 11 years preparing for a war she never wanted, made him believe, in some way he couldn't fully explain, that it was true. They weren't doing this because they enjoyed it. They were doing this because they had to. Because something about the way humans were built, the 10,000 years of war, the ice ages and plagues and disasters survived, the ability to hold together through 11 years of secret preparation, had taught them that some problems don't go away unless you deal with them completely. But also, and this was the part he hadn't expected, hadn't planned for, had no intelligence file to explain, they knew when to stop. That might have been the most dangerous thing of all, a civilization that could fight that hard and then choose to stop, not because they were tired, not because they were weak, but because they decided it was enough. He turned to Korath. "Status on escape routes," he said, already knowing the answer. "Blocked, sir, all of them. 6 jump points, all covered." He turned to his weapons officer. "If we fire everything simultaneously, all ships, full spread, can we break the circle?" The weapons officer pulled up the numbers. He worked them twice, then he set them down.
"No, sir," he said. "We caused damage, significant damage, but the circle holds. We'd lose another 40 ships minimum and still be contained. And then," he paused, "and then they finish it." Zyrex nodded slowly. He looked at Chen on screen one more time. She hadn't moved. She was just waiting, still patient. 8 minutes of firepower in her hands, and she was just waiting. "Admiral Chen," he said. "General, if I accept your terms, what exactly are the terms?" Chen straightened slightly. "Full cease of hostilities. Your fleet powers down weapons and holds position. Your ships will be escorted to the edge of the solar system and released. Every crew member goes home. No prisoners, no ships held, no reparations. Except one. Which is? You go home and you tell the truth about what happened here. Every detail. You don't minimize it. You don't frame it as a strategic retreat or intelligence failure or bad luck. You tell the full story, that Earth was ready, that Earth won, and that Earth let you leave." She looked at him steadily. "Can you do that?" Zyrex was quiet for a long moment. Then, and this surprised even him, he almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because of the audacity of it. To beat someone this completely and then ask them to carry your message home for you. To turn your enemy into your messenger. It was, he had to admit, strategically perfect. "You planned that too," he said quietly. "The terms." Chen tilted her head slightly. "We planned everything, General." He believed her. "Power down weapons," he said, not loudly, almost quietly, but every person on the bridge heard it clearly. "All ships, send the order."
The Vorrkai fleet powered down in stages. Ship by ship, across the whole formation, the weapons went dark and the shields dropped to passive mode. The process took 11 minutes. Every human ship held position and watched in silence. No celebration, no taunting transmissions, just watching, steady and patient, until the last Vorrkai destroyer confirmed standby status. Then the human ships began to move, not aggressively, but deliberately, forming an escort corridor that pointed toward the outer edge of the solar system. A clear path, an open road home. As the Eternal Dominion began to move through the corridor, Zyrex stood at the viewport and watched the human ships on either side. They were close enough that he could see the hull markings. He had spent 3 years studying this civilization through reports and surveillance data and had never actually looked at them. Not really. Not like this. The ships were different from each other. Not just slightly, significantly. Different construction styles, different hull shapes, different marking systems from what must have been different nations. But they moved together like a single organism. The same spacing, the same speed, the same absolute precision. 11 years of training, all of it showing in this single corridor of ships holding position as his fleet passed through. He arrived at the outer marker, the invisible line that represented the edge of monitored human space, and Admiral Chen's voice came through one final time. "Admiral," she said. "General, you will have more enemies," he said, not as a threat, just as a fact. "The galaxy is large. The Empire is not the only power that looks at your planet." "I know," she said. "Does that not concern you?" There was a short pause. "It concerns me a great deal," she said, "but not as much as it concerns them, now that this is on the record." Another pause. "Goodbye, General." The channel closed. Zyrex stood at the viewport as Earth shrank behind him, blue and quiet and impossibly small against the darkness of space. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned away and went to his desk and began to write. He wrote for 6 hours without stopping. He wrote everything: the transmission he had sent, the 60-minute countdown, the fleet he had brought, the 463 ships that had appeared from behind the moon, every battle movement, every failed counter-strategy, every moment where the math had been against him. He wrote about Kora's encirclement map. He wrote about the human officer who rammed her ship rather than retreat. He wrote about Chen's voice on the open channel, patient and unhurried, telling her she knew what order he had just given. He wrote about the terms, the full truth, every detail, no minimizing. When he was done, he transmitted the full document to the Vorrkai Imperial Council. Then, and this was not in any protocol, not in any manual, not something anyone told him to do, he transmitted it openly, on every galactic communication frequency his ship could reach. He wasn't sure exactly why he did that. Maybe because Chen had asked him to tell the truth and he had agreed. Maybe because 200 years of certainty collapsing in 4 hours does something to a person that makes them want everyone to know what actually happened. Maybe because the Drenhai elder who had sent the warning had been right, and he wanted someone, anyone, to know that the warning had existed and he had ignored it. The document traveled across the galaxy at the speed of light. It reached the Drenhai homeworld first, where the elder who had sent the warning read it slowly and then sat in silence for a very long time. It reached 17 other civilizations within the week. It reached outposts and councils and military headquarters and research stations across 6 star systems. Everyone read it. Not because the Vorrkai Empire losing was shocking, though it was, but because of the terms, because of what Earth had done with the victory. They had let them go. A civilization that had spent 11 years preparing for war, that had surrounded and completely defeated the most powerful assault fleet in the known galaxy, had said, "Go home," and asked for nothing except the truth. That was the part nobody could stop talking about. Back on Earth, Admiral Chen sat in her office at the UEDF Command Center and read the intercepts as they came in. Reports of Xyrex's transmissions spreading, responses from other civilizations, the galactic community processing what had happened. Her assistant brought her tea. "It's working," he said quietly. "Maybe," she said. She looked out the window at the sky. Clear today, blue. You couldn't tell, looking at it, that 22 hours ago it had been full of warships. "They'll come back eventually. Someone will. There are a lot of civilizations out there." "Yes," Chen said. "So what do we do?" She picked up her tea. She looked at the sky. "Same thing we've always done. We get ready, we stay ready, and we hope they read the report first." She set her tea down and pulled up the next briefing document. Outside, somewhere above the clouds, the last Vorrkai ship crossed the boundary of the solar system and disappeared into the dark. And across the galaxy, in ship after ship, on planet after planet, in council chambers and military headquarters and quiet research stations, leaders and commanders and historians read General Xyrex's report in silence. The message it carried was simple, undeniable, written in the plain language of a soldier who had been asked to tell the truth and did exactly that. Earth is not a target. It was never a target. We just didn't know that yet. Now we do. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, not because of a treaty, not because of a larger empire standing in the way, not because of politics or alliances or carefully negotiated agreements, the known civilizations of the galaxy looked at that small blue planet and made a collective, quiet, unspoken decision: leave it alone. Not because humans were the strongest, not because they had the biggest fleet, but because of a story, a true one, about a civilization that had survived everything the universe had thrown at it for 10,000 years, that had held itself together for 11 years in secret to prepare for one fight, that won completely and then opened a door and said, "Go home."
a civilization that fought that hard and still knew when to stop. That was the story General Zyrex carried home. That was the story that echoed across the galaxy for 100 years. That was the last warning anyone ever needed. Don't mistake patience for weakness. Don't mistake kindness for surrender. And never, under any circumstances, mistake a species that has already survived its own extinction for something that can be threatened to kneel. Humans don't kneel. They wait. And when they're ready, they make sure you never forget it.